Morvan Marshall, Breton nationalist and designer of the Breton national flag, fatally shot by a French nationalist in Brest as his nation capitulated. Eric Blair, better known as George Orwell, killed in December 1935 by nationalist bombing raids during the siege of Paris. Charles de Gaulle, Republican general, encircled at Lyon and now imprisoned at Versailles. Blanchette Brunoy, famous French actress, on vacation with family in Marseille as war broke out, caught in crossfire only 3 days later. These, among over 1 million others, are the casualties brought on as a byproduct of the French national state, which now stands as a scar in Western Europe. The brainchild of François de Larocque and sponsored by Benito Mussolini, the state and its forces are now reorganizing themselves in order to defend from external threats and scout out opportunities for expansion. At its foundation, this reorganization includes integration with what one may call the fascist world. Mussolini and Larocque, soon after the cessation of hostilities, announced their intentions to negotiate not only a military, but also economic and social alliance between themselves and potentially other far-right proponents in Europe, including both Mosley and Hitler. Talks are scheduled to take place in the mostly unscathed city of Monaco. That such talks will lead to any sort of agreement is, however, ambiguous at present. Internationally, the French national state surprisingly enjoys a modicum of popularity. Larocque, after sending messages of final victory to Mussolini, sends similar messages to DC and Tokyo. Their responses do not congratulate, but are warmer than expected. London initiates communication before Paris can first, with the message that they hope Anglo-French social and business ties may be maintained. Though Berlin offers no response, even Moscow remains diplomatic, attempting to pursue the idea of Western and Eastern cordiality in order to surround Germany. But we are missing a key part of the puzzle. What has happened to the former French Empire? Has Larocque gained full control of the former colonies, or have they evaporated into states under native control? We may find that the answer to this question will not only decide the fate of France, but Europe and more in the future. Let's return to February 1934. South, across the Mediterranean, the western portion of the Arab world ignites almost immediately after the mainland. Starting in Algiers, Constantine, and Belabès, Algerian nationalists, whether of the communist, pan-Arab, or Islamist flavor, come together under the leadership of Massali al-Haji, who is often credited as the father of Algerian nationalism. In response, French forces are set on alert and tasked with maintaining what stability may remain. Despite this, the Algerians are making headway towards connecting their initial power centers. This emboldens many of their Arab brothers to the east. In Tunisia, who, having just recently considered establishing a more radical arm of their independence movement, seize the day and take to the streets in open revolt. Their initial gains are promising, and communiques are sent between them and the Algerians, establishing mutual support and suggesting an eventual pan-Arab state. However, the French are not the only issue to deal with. That the Tunisians would rebel was one hope Mussolini had when devising his overarching strategic plan. He uses the rebellion as a casus belli, and soon his troops enter Tunisia, looking to use the chaos to bring all of the country under Italian control. Besides that from Thérèse and Domergue, the international backlash against this is next to none. A similar yet different operation also takes place in Algeria, with the nationalists occupying key ports on the northern coast, no matter whether they're controlled by the Algerians or their French enemies. The intent? To occupy the ports, drive out the Republicans, maintain peace with Algeria, and use the ports as a bargaining chip at the end of the war. The Algerians comply reluctantly. What we have witnessed so far is the primary conflict in the Maghreb. the Italians versus the Tunisians, and everyone against the French Republic. However, Morocco has remained oddly separate from this devastation. For them, this conflict starts and ends with the lone revolt in Casablanca. The failed Rif rebellion ending in 1926, Morocco has largely been willing to seek independence peacefully and has now achieved such through negotiations. Disgruntled by the concessions for the French, British, and Spanish, a faction has made a bid for national control, though has met with little support. Now, across the Maghreb, events are coming to a close for the Republicans as they are on the mainland. The Italians have cornered them to the Nabil Peninsula. The Algerians and Larocque's men have essentially landlocked them in eastern Algeria, and Morocco has been signed away. As peace deals are signed with Larocque, so too are they signed with Al-Haji and Mussolini. This is the new Maghreb. In its western portion, the negotiations between Morocco and the Republicans are realized as Morocco is given control piece by piece of its corresponding French protectorate. To the east, Tunisia has been fully enveloped by the Italian state and combined with Libya into a new holding called the Italian Maghreb. In its center, the Maghreb now houses two states, the Algerian Republic, with its first elections planned for February 1935, and the French national state, which sits just north of the city of Constantine as a symbol of ominous warning from Larocque. For now, the Algerians are largely forced into international neutrality, though friendly relations are built with Morocco and the Soviets, while the Moroccans, via their negotiations, are made to maintain ties to Spain, Britain, and the French government in exile. On the other side of the Arab world, the Levant erupts into conflict almost as quickly as in the Maghreb. Beginning in Lebanon, this initial rebellion inspires others to do similar, and soon a multitude of other groups join the fray. These include the Druze and Alawite religious minority groups, the majority population via the Damascus and Aleppo revolts, and finally the Kurds. These varied movements altogether form a crescent from Jordan to Turkey, and display an opposition to the French unseen in the region even during the Great Syrian Revolt only 9 years prior. This strategic setup, unfortunately for the French, essentially cuts them off from any sort of power center which could meaningfully aid them. To the north is Turkey, who actually decides to oppose the French in this conflict, believing that realizing their claim to the province of Hatay to be a greater benefit. Iraq isn't much help either, as they view the conflict with similar passive aggression. The British to the south are nominally willing to help, but would have to transport goods through the Syrian desert or militarily intervene through Damascus, neither which they decide is worthwhile. To the west, the crescent bleeds any sort of naval support dry, as the coast is engulfed in occupation. Overall, the end of this conflict is a formality, but that does not end the story, for where the French one ends, many more stories begin. For the Lebanese, their state is secured for the foreseeable future. Habib Pasha al-Assad, having only been in office as president of Lebanon for 17 days, when disorganized Lebanese forces first took to arms, took to the ground running in the international sphere. Negotiations began with various other powers, and Lebanon now already enjoys recognition from the British, Italians, Greeks, and Turkish, with hope for deeper ties. Once peace returns, the cedars of Lebanon should be on their way to prosperity. For the rest of the Levant, achieving the same is taking a bit more time and finesse. At the onset of this conflict, there had been intent from some minority factions that they would maintain their own independent states post-war. Day by day, however, this seems increasingly unlikely. For the Druze and Alawites, outside powers have been quite muted in their words, while Aleppo and Damascus have been cordial but firm in the idea that all of Syria would eventually become a unified state. The British and Italians lend credence to this as they show greater warmth in discussions with both Ibrahim Hananu and Shukri al-Kuwatli. For the Kurds, their hand has been the most forced of all. Given the breadth of the Kurdish populations in Turkey and Iraq, those states have continually berated Aleppo and Damascus for even being willing to be friendly with the Kurds, and have off and on sent raids across their borders into Kurdish territory. Despite these points of contention, the six Levantine factions are nearing victory against the French. On October 2nd, the Levant authority falls, with the Druze, Alawites, and Kurds taking control of their core population centers, and Aleppo and Damascus splitting the rest of Syria. To quell the Turkish and Iraqi heat, the Kurds agree to be subsumed under Aleppo, yet are given substantial autonomy, which is expected to increase over time. With more negotiation, even the Druze and Alawites are willing to do the same. Soon, the Syrian Republic is born, and makes its first plays on the geopolitical scene by reaching out to Lebanon to establish peacetime diplomatic ties and discuss the potential for a pan-Arab state in the Levant. In Africa, we find a region that will perhaps burn the brightest of all with its adherence to the call of independence. Starting towards the east, in the colonial capital city of Bangui, an alliance between the Gabaya and Mbaka peoples make the first move against the French. Frightened that overcommitting their troops could further destabilize, Antonetti and his diplomats quickly make peace. For them, however, this is only the beginning. The peace, a sign of success to all opposition, spurs them to action as well. Soon, the northern half of Equatorial Africa is in way over its head. In response, the French double down on their strategy. They seek not only peace again with Bangui, but with every other rebellion as well. For most of them, this is another enticing prospect. Why not dare just once and come out victorious for it? For Sandakura and his men of the Neo-Borno Empire, however, this is not enough. They desire not only their own limited holding, but one which is in a position of leadership amongst its neighbors and has its frontiers stretching from the Sahara in the north to the Gulf of Guinea to the south. Stories of this defiance against the pleas of the French reverberate not only in Equatorial Africa, but also into the heartlands of West Africa. Having been kept under lock and key for months now, a diversity of movements are about to spring forth out from under the pressure. The first rebellions to burn alight are the Neo-Wosolo and Volta empires. The former, a revival of the Wosolo Empire, is a movement centered around the Mandinka peoples. Their initial goal, similar to Borno's, is to form the preeminent post-colonial empire in their region, while also uniting all of their peoples and expelling any sort of extracontinental influence. This last goal naturally brings conflict with the British. London, having been commandeering France's remaining coastal colonies, is looking to create a semi-autonomous West African federation, one they hope can work in their favor in the short term without the need for military intervention to establish and maintain it. As for the Volta Empire, their goals differ only in ideology. Its followers, the most bereft in the months of suppression prior to rebellion, have a powerful feeling of pessimism for the present world, and are seeking to wipe clean the social canvas of West Africa to make it ready for something new. In essence, where others look to breath or unity for motivation, the Volta seek apocalypse. West Africa, having now fallen to its many rebellions, leaves only Greater Borno and Equatorial Africa left fighting. With Borno's gains in Cameroon, Antonetti has made several attempts to gain the support of Larocque and switch over to the nationalist cause. In apprehension, the British have now countered and both economically and diplomatically embargoed Equatorial Africa. This leaves the last Republican holding in the super-region stranded, and, while some of the remaining leaders are offered an out by the British, the conclusion here is an obvious one. In the end, peace is made, with Borno achieving its aims and the British reaching out to Sandakura for talks. The final region to cover now is Indochina. One of France's most far-flung colonial holdings, it is prone to being lost in an instant. To avert this, Paris brings the region's protectorates under one structure, though this is only a lukewarm attempt at salvation. The first uprisings begin with the Indochinese Communist Party, which activates its underground fighters across the region, first in the city of Hanoi. Initially led by informal leadership, Ho Chi Minh, located in Moscow at the start of the war, is assigned as leader of the uprising by the Communist International. He arrives in Hanoi in June and begins the work of unifying the movement's disparate fronts. Opposing this work are not only the French, but also the various nationalist movements of the region, which operate in a close alliance, but maintain their own distinctions. For Vietnam, their uprising is the story of the underdog become master. Their current leader, Phan Boi Cho, who had advocated for his nation's independence for 3 decades and has been under house arrest for the last 9 years, was able to escape his confinement at the start of the Civil War and was given leadership of the uprising by his compatriots. Now, his men hold the former French-controlled Vietnamese emperor, Bao Dai, hostage for the foreseeable future. In Laos, their uprising is from the throne rather than a grassroots campaign. Sisavangvong, king of Laos under the French, led his men in rebellion as soon as other uprisings had started. A surprise to the French that he would rebel, the Vietnamese have accepted the help heartily, despite the monarchical difference. As for Cambodia, their uprising is also top-down. Initially fearing French backlash due to the proximity of Cambodia to French-controlled waters, Sisowath Monavang and his men laid low, only to formally rebel in October 1934. These 3 factions altogether make up the nationalist movement and oppose both the French and Communists, making this war a 3-sided one, with opportunities for external powers to intervene, including the British, Chinese, Japanese, and the Soviets. For Moscow, their beneficiary is of course the all-region Communists, though the Soviets are limited to symbolic rather than physical support due to their lacking naval presence in East Asia. Despite this, the Indochinese Communist Party has been able to make do with its current reserves and productions, mostly due to the hardened loyalty of its members and their strategic activism. The nationalists, however, have been quite reliant on the external powers, in particular the Chinese and Japanese, for material support to maintain their war effort. Whether to secure their borders or expand their influence for a continental alliance, both powers are working in tandem to expel extracontinental authority. In response, the Chinese Communist Party intensifies its anti-government operations against the Kuomintang. Finally, London has surprisingly played both sides to this conflict. Having pulled support quickly from the French, they have provided limited support to both the Communists and Nationalists. On the ground, the war in Indochina is now at a standstill. Going forward into the coming years, the North will maintain its Communist loyalty, while the South will oppose it with its trifecta of domestic tendencies. From Calais to the Congo, and from Dakar to Guangzhou Wan, we have seen the primary effects of the French Civil War wrought by Mussolini and Larocque. In the mainland, where over 1 million lost their lives and countless others had their lives forever changed, a regime aligned with the fascist world rather than the West has sprung up, and the effects it's inflicted on the world before it's even had a chance to breathe have been immense. In addition to the realms covered so far, the results in the rest of the French colonial empire should be mentioned. In Madagascar and French Guiana, each was able to gain independence with relative peace. Madagascar alone, and Guiana after occupation and relent from the British. In places like Saint Pierre and Miquelon, the British have taken them under their wing, integrating them into their empire. Finally, in other locations like Mayotte, they remain ostensibly under Republican influence, though British aid is quite obvious. Given all that, we now have the lay of the land in full. For the world's great powers, we know that France and Italy are on their way to becoming brothers inseparable. The British have taken an oddly aggressive, yet mediating attitude, while the Soviets are building what cordiality they can with both the capitalist and fascist worlds. For China and Japan, they are reaching out to see what they can do, while Germany has not been heard from since the remilitarization of the Rhineland. Next, we shall see the first moves Larocque and Mussolini make in the international sphere after the Civil War, and how these other powers and their leaders shall respond to them. Who will dare, and who will win?